Hey friends, tonight we're gently stepping back in time to explore what it was really like to be a medieval healer, a quiet life filled with herbs, soft candlelight, and whispered remedies in small village homes. Before we begin, I'd love to know, as you're listening right now, what city are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. I truly enjoy seeing where our peaceful history community is gathering from around the world. And if you enjoy slow, calming history stories like this, don't forget to subscribe so you can join me on more quiet journeys into the past. Now, take a slow breath in and gently breathe out. Get comfortable, dim the lights, and let's travel back to the Middle Ages. The first light of morning had not yet reached the village. A thin silver mist still rested low over the damp earth, and the world felt suspended between night and day. In a small clearing at the edge of the village stood a modest wooden cottage. Its roof was thick with thatch, its chimney narrow and dark against the pale sky, and its single round window faintly glowing with the last ember of the night's fire. This was the home of the village healer. Inside, the air was warm, carrying the soft scent of dried lavender, rosemary, and wood smoke. Bundles of herbs hung from the ceiling beams in careful rows. Some were pale and brittle, others deep green and fragrant, all gathered by hand, in season, with patience. On a small wooden table near the hearth rested a heavy stone mortar and pestle. Beside it, tiny clay jars sealed with wax, each jar labelled in careful ink in a script practised over many quiet evenings. The healer was already awake. She rose before the sun most days, not because she was restless, but because dawn was when the world felt most balanced. Before villagers knocked at her door, before children cried with fevers, before farmers arrived with aching backs, there was this stillness. She sat upright from her straw-filled mattress, pulling a simple wool shawl around her shoulders. The floor beneath her bare feet was cool. For a moment, she simply listened. The faint crackle of the dying fire, a distant rooster, wind brushing against the thatch. It would be a clear day. She moved quietly across the cottage, adding a small log to the hearth. Flames returned slowly, stretching upward, casting soft golden light across the hanging herbs. In that light, the cottage almost seemed enchanted. Glass bottles caught the glow, casting delicate shadows against the wall. A bundle of sage swayed gently from a ceiling beam. The healer reached for a clay cup, pouring warm water from an iron kettle. She did not rush. Her life required patience. Every remedy, every visit, every decision carried weight. In a world without hospitals, without pharmacists, without printed medical books, she was often the first and only comfort people sought. Yet at this hour, she was simply a woman in a quiet cottage, drinking warm water by the fire. The morning ritual. Before stepping outside, she always performed the same ritual, not magic, not superstition, but awareness. She walked slowly around the cottage, checking each drying bundle, turning them gently, ensuring air could pass through evenly. Thyme for coughs, chamomile for rest, yarrow for wounds. Each plant had been gathered carefully, at the right time of day, in the right season. The knowledge had not come from books alone. It had come from watching, listening, learning from another healer before her. In medieval villages, knowledge often passed quietly, from one steady pair of hands to another. No formal schooling, no grand ceremonies, just repetition and trust. She paused at a bundle of lavender, lifting it close to her face. The scent was calming. Villagers often asked if her remedies truly worked, or if they simply felt comforted by her presence. Perhaps it was both. Stepping into the morning. At last. She opened the wooden door. Cool air brushed against her face. The sky was now soft grey blue, with hints of gold rising behind distant trees. Beyond her cottage, small homes were beginning to stir. Thin trails of smoke rose into the sky. A farmer led his ox slowly across damp ground. A child ran toward the well with an empty bucket. Life was beginning. The healer stepped carefully onto the grass. Morning dew dampened her sandals. She carried with her a woven basket. Not for villagers, not yet. This first hour belonged to gathering. Even though herbs already hung in her cottage, freshness mattered. Some remedies required leaves picked at dawn, when oils were strongest. She moved toward the tree line at the edge of the clearing. The forest was quiet. Birdsong echoed faintly between trunks. Sunlight slowly filtered through branches, creating soft beams across the forest floor. She knelt near a patch of low green leaves, touching them gently, examining their shape. This one would be useful today. A villager had complained of restless sleep the evening before. A mild infusion, brewed slowly, might ease the mind. She clipped the leaves carefully, placing them into her basket. No plant was taken carelessly. Each harvest required gratitude, balance, understanding that nature gave, but only if respected. The responsibility of a healer. As she moved through the trees, her thoughts were not heavy, but they were aware. Being a medieval healer meant carrying uncertainty. There were illnesses she understood well, coughs from winter air, cuts from farming tools, fevers that rose and fell with the seasons. But there were also mysteries, a sudden sickness no herb could soothe, a weakness that returned again and again. In those moments, she could only offer comfort, warm broth, cool cloths, presence, and in truth, presence alone often mattered more than villagers realized. In a time without medical certainty, fear was powerful. The healer's calm demeanour, her steady voice, her quiet confidence. These were remedies too. Returning to the cottage. By the time the sun had fully risen, her basket was half full. Soft leaves, a few flowering stems, roots wrapped gently in cloth. She returned to her cottage. Smoke now rose steadily from the chimney. Inside, the light was brighter. She placed the basket on the wooden table and began sorting. Some leaves she spread on drying cloth. Others she crushed lightly between fingers, testing aroma, texture, freshness. The mortar and pestle would soon echo softly, stone against stone, but not yet. There was no rush. Outside, the village would soon begin knocking, but for now, this hour still belonged to preparation, to quiet intention, to the steady rhythm of a healer's dawn. And as the day slowly unfolded beyond her door, the small wooden cottage remained a place of warmth, of patience, of simple remedies, a place where medieval life, with all its uncertainty, met steady hands and calm understanding. Tonight, as you rest, you can imagine that cottage, the scent of herbs in the air, the gentle crackle of firelight, and the healer, moving quietly in the golden morning glow. The day has only just begun, and there is much more to explore. In the life of a medieval healer, the morning sun had now fully risen, but inside the forest the light still felt soft, filtered, gentle. Tall oak and birch trees stretched high above, their leaves whispering faintly in the early breeze. The healer walked slowly along a narrow earth path, woven between roots and patches of moss. Her woven basket rested lightly against her hip, lined with clean linen cloth. Each step was careful, not hurried. In her world, rushing rarely helped. The forest was more than a source of medicine. It was a teacher, a quiet companion, and sometimes a place of reflection. Birdsong drifted softly overhead. Somewhere in the distance, a woodpecker tapped rhythmically against bark. The air smelled damp and green. carrying the scent of soil that had cooled overnight. She paused beside a cluster of low-growing plants, broad leaves, slightly silver underneath. She knelt slowly, touching the leaf between her fingers, cool, supple, fresh with dew. These leaves, when dried and steeped gently, could ease a restless stomach. Not every villager understood how plants worked. Many believed healing came from charms or whispered prayers, and while the healer respected belief, her confidence came from observation, from seasons watched carefully, from patterns remembered. She clipped 3 leaves, no more than needed. A healer learned restraint early. Taking too much from the earth meant returning to emptiness later. Balance was everything. The language of seasons. In the Middle Ages, medicine followed the rhythm of the land. There were no supply carts, no preserved bottles shipped from far cities. If winter had been harsh, her stores might run low. If spring came gently, her shelves would fill again. Each season offered something different. Spring brought tender green shoots. Summer offered fragrant blossoms. Autumn yielded roots, thick and earthy. Winter required planning. The healer walked deeper into the trees, where sunlight gathered in warm patches across the ground. Here she searched for flowering stems, small white petals, delicate but useful. She hummed softly to herself, a simple melody, not loud enough to disturb the quiet, but steady enough to keep rhythm with her steps. The forest floor felt soft beneath her sandals. Occasionally a twig snapped underfoot, but mostly there was peace. Learning without books. Though some monasteries preserved medical texts, most village healers relied on memory, knowledge passed down quietly, sometimes from a grandmother, sometimes from a travelling apothecary, sometimes learned slowly through trial and observation. The healer remembered her own teacher, an older woman with steady hands and watchful eyes. She had once said, "Plants speak if you are patient enough to listen." At first, the words felt mysterious, but over time, the meaning became clear. Leaves drooped when over-harvested. Roots weakened if pulled too early. Certain herbs thrived only in shaded soil. Observation was education. The healer paused again near a fallen log. Tiny mushrooms clustered along damp bark. She examined them carefully, but left them untouched. Not all natural things were meant to heal. Wisdom included knowing when not to gather. A moment of stillness. Before filling her basket further, she sat quietly on a smooth stone, closing her eyes for a moment. The forest air felt cool against her cheeks. Sunlight warmed her shoulders. Some days, villagers would line up at her door, requests, concerns, questions. But here, in this quiet hour, there were no demands, only breath, only wind, only distant birdsong. She inhaled slowly, then exhaled. The rhythm matched the sway of branches above. This pause was important. Healing others required steadiness within. Without this calm beginning, the day could feel heavy. After a few quiet minutes, she opened her eyes. The world seemed brighter somehow. Gathering roots. Further along the path, she reached a patch of darker soil. Here grew thicker plants, their leaves rougher, their stems stronger. Kneeling once more, she brushed aside loose earth carefully. Her fingers found the edge of a root, firm, healthy. She loosened the soil gently, lifting it free without breaking it. Roots required patience, too much force, and the plant was wasted. She wrapped the root in cloth before placing it into her basket. Roots often form the base of stronger remedies, ground slowly in the mortar, mixed with warmed water, or steeped for hours near the fire. Their scent was deeper, earthier, more grounding, the weight of responsibility. As her basket grew heavier, so did her awareness of responsibility. Villagers trusted her. Parents brought feverish children to her door. Farmers relied on her when aches lingered too long. Sometimes she succeeded quickly. Sometimes improvement came slowly. And sometimes she could only offer comfort and hope. In a time without certainty, trust itself was precious. But for now, the forest asked nothing of her except attention. She gathered a final handful of slender stems, light green, fragrant when crushed lightly between fingers, perfect for calming teas. Then she stood, stretching her back gently. The sun had climbed higher now. Light filtering through leaves had grown brighter. It was nearly time to return. Walking back toward the village. The path back felt familiar, almost comforting. She noticed small changes along the way. A fallen branch not there yesterday. Fresh animal tracks in damp soil. The forest was always shifting, never exactly the same. As she reached the tree line, the village came into view, smoke drifting lazily into the sky. Children's voices faint in the distance. A dog barking briefly. The world of people awaited her. But she did not feel hurried. Her basket was well filled, her mind steady, her hands ready. Preparing for the day ahead. When she reached her cottage, she paused before entering, looking once more at the open sky, breathing in the last quiet moment before the day's request began. Then she stepped inside, placing the basket gently on the wooden table. Sunlight streamed through the small round window now, illuminating floating dust particles in the air. The cottage smelled of herbs and warm wood. It was time to begin preparing remedies, but that would unfold slowly, carefully, with the steady rhythm of stone against stone. And as you listen tonight, you can imagine that quiet forest, the soft earth beneath careful steps, the gentle sound of leaves brushing overhead, and the simple act of gathering nature's gifts, one leaf at a time. The day of a medieval healer is only just beginning, and there is still much to discover. Inside the healer's cottage, the air had grown warmer. Sunlight streamed softly through the small round window, falling in a golden circle upon the wooden floor. The basket of freshly gathered herbs rested on the table, leaves still cool from the forest air. For a moment, the healer simply stood there, listening. The fire crackled gently in the hearth. Somewhere outside, a cartwheel rolled slowly across dirt, but inside, the cottage remained calm. This was her workshop, her quiet place of transformation, where simple plants became comfort. Sorting the morning's harvest. She untied the linen cloth from around the roots first, placing them carefully on a clean wooden board. Each root was examined, turned slowly in her hand. She checked for blemishes, soft spots, or signs of damage. Anything imperfect was set aside, not discarded, but reserved for weaker infusions. Only the healthiest pieces were used for stronger remedies. Next came the leaves. Broad ones were laid flat upon woven drying mats. Smaller stems were gathered into loose bundles. The cottage began to fill with scent. Fresh green notes from crushed leaves, earthy tones rising from roots, a faint sweetness from flowering stems. It was not an overwhelming smell, but layered, comforting, alive. The mortar and pestle. On the table sat her heaviest tool, a stone mortar, smooth on the inside from years of use. Beside it, the matching pestle, rounded, worn, familiar to her hands. She selected a small handful of leaves first, the ones meant to calm restless sleep, dropping them gently into the mortar. For a brief second, the cottage was completely still. Then, a slow grinding sound began. Stone against stone, soft, rhythmic, circular motions. She did not crush them violently. Instead, she pressed firmly and turned. Press, turn, release, press, turn, release. The leaves began to darken slightly, their scent strengthening, essential oils releasing slowly. The sound itself was soothing, a steady, grounded rhythm, almost like distant thunder softened by hills. If someone had been resting nearby, it might have lulled them gently towards sleep. The art of patience. In the medieval world, medicine required time. There were no quick dissolving powders, no instant results. Every remedy unfolded slowly. The healer transferred the crushed leaves into a small clay bowl, then poured warm water over them from the kettle. Not boiling, just warm enough to encourage release. Steam rose gently from the surface, carrying fragrance into the air. She covered the bowl with cloth, allowing it to steep. While waiting, she moved to the roots. These required more strength. Placing a small section into the mortar, she began again. This time, the grinding was heavier, a deeper sound, stone pressing firmly, root fibres breaking down gradually. Her movements remained unhurried. Years of practice meant no wasted motion. Each action efficient, quiet, intentional. Firelight and glass bottles. As clouds passed outside, light shifted in the cottage. The fire became the dominant glow. Flames flickered softly, casting dancing shadows across shelves lined with glass bottles. Some bottles held oils infused weeks earlier, golden liquid inside clear glass. Others contained dried powders, fine as sand. She rose to retrieve one small bottle, uncorking it carefully. Inside was an oil prepared from summer blossoms. She added only a few drops to the crushed root mixture. The scent deepened immediately, layered, complex, healing in its own gentle way. Quiet precision. The healer worked without haste, but never without attention. Too much root, and the infusion would be bitter. Too little leaf, and it would be weak. Her fingers measured without scales. Her eyes judged without rulers. Experience was her guide. Outside. A knock sounded faintly at the cottage door. Not urgent, just a gentle tap. The day's first visitor had arrived, but she did not rush to answer immediately. The tea needed a few more moments. She strained the liquid slowly through cloth, watching it drip into a waiting cup. Amber in colour, soft steam rising. Only then did she wipe her hands on linen and move toward the door. A healer's presence. When she opened the door, a young mother stood outside, child resting sleepily against her shoulder. The healer offered a calm smile. No dramatic greeting, no worry in her face, just steadiness. She handed the warm cup carefully, explaining in a quiet voice, small sips before rest. The mother nodded gratefully. In medieval villages, a healer's presence often mattered more than her mixtures. Confidence spread like warmth. Calm eased tension. The door closed again. Footsteps faded, and the healer returned to her table. Afternoon preparations. The rest of the morning passed in similar rhythm. Grinding, steeping, straining. Labelling small clay jars with simple ink marks. Each jar placed carefully on a shelf. She recorded notes in a worn leather-bound book. Not long descriptions, just reminders. Spring leaf, stronger this year. Root from Eastern Grove, potent. These small observations built knowledge over time, layer by layer, season by season. The sound of quiet. Work. As afternoon light softened, the cottage settled into a peaceful hush. Only small sounds remained. The gentle clink of glass, the scrape of mortar, the crackle of fire, wind brushing against the thatch roof. It was honest work. Not glamorous, not loud, but meaningful. Each remedy prepared today would ease someone's discomfort tomorrow. Each mixture carried care within it, and care, in the Middle Ages, was often the rarest medicine of all. Evening glow. As the sun began lowering, the interior of the cottage glowed amber. Shadows stretched longer across the floor. The healer cleaned her tools slowly, rinsing the mortar with warm water, drying the pestle with cloth, placing everything back in its place. Order mattered. Tomorrow would bring new needs, new knocks at the door. But for now, the day's preparations were complete. She sat beside the hearth once more, watching flames curl gently upward, hands resting quietly in her lap, breathing steady, calm. The scent of herbs lingered in the air, soft and grounding. And as you rest tonight, you can imagine that warm cottage, the steady rhythm of stone grinding leaf, the gentle rise of steam from a clay bowl, the glow of firelight reflecting in glass bottles, a quiet life, a patient craft, a healer preparing comfort, one careful motion at a time. The afternoon sun had begun its slow descent. Shadows from cottages stretched longer across the dirt paths of the village. A soft golden light rested gently on thatched rooftops, and the air carried the scent of baked bread and wood smoke. Inside her small cottage, the healer prepared for her visits. She wrapped several small clay jars in linen cloth, placing them carefully into her woven satchel. Each jar labelled with a simple mark, a leaf for calming tea, a small line for root infusion, a circle for soothing salve. She did not carry many remedies at once, only what she expected might be needed. The rest would wait safely on her shelves. She pulled her wool cloak around her shoulders, not because the air was cold, but because evenings in the village often grew cool quickly. Before leaving, she paused beside the hearth, ensuring the fire was safely contained. The cottage would remain warm when she returned. Then she stepped outside. The village path. The dirt path felt firm beneath her sandals. Children's laughter echoed faintly near the well. A farmer leaned against a wooden fence, speaking softly with his neighbour. When they noticed the healer passing, they nodded respectfully. In medieval villages, a healer was both ordinary and essential. She was not royalty, not wealthy, not powerful in the way a lord might be. Yet her presence carried quiet importance. She walked without hurry. There was no need to rush. Illness, like healing, unfolded slowly. Her first stop was a small cottage near the edge of the village. Smoke rose thinly from its chimney. The door stood slightly open. She tapped gently against the wood. A soft voice invited her in. A warm, dim interior. Inside. The cottage was dimly lit by late afternoon light. A small fire burned low in the hearth. A wooden table stood near the centre of the room. On a simple straw bed, an older man rested quietly, not gravely ill, just weakened by a lingering cough. The healer approached calmly, sitting on a small stool beside the bed. She did not speak immediately. Instead, she listened, to the rhythm of his breathing, to the tone of his cough, to the quiet concerns in the room. The man's wife stood nearby, wringing her hands gently. The healer offered her a reassuring glance. Then she reached into her satchel. Removing a small jar marked with a leaf, she explained softly, "Warm water, steeped slowly, before rest." Her voice was steady, not dramatic. The older man nodded faintly. There was comfort simply in being attended to. Sometimes healing began the moment someone felt heard. Walking between homes, after a short while, she stepped back into the fading daylight. The sky now painted in soft orange and pale pink. Evening approached gently. Her next visit was farther down the path. A young mother had requested help earlier that morning. The healer walked slowly, passing vegetable gardens and stacked firewood. The village dog trotted briefly at her side, then wandered away again. Chickens clucked quietly near wooden pens. Life here was simple, predictable in many ways, yet fragile. Illness could change the rhythm of a household quickly. That was why her presence mattered. The restless child. At the second cottage, A child lay bundled beneath wool blankets, not feverish, just restless. Sleep had not come easily. The healer knelt beside the bed, brushing a few strands of hair gently from the child's forehead. She removed a small linen pouch from her satchel. Inside, dried, calming leaves. She instructed the mother to place the pouch near the child's pillow. The scent alone might encourage rest. Then she poured a small measure of infused tea into a wooden cup. "Only a few sips," she said softly. The mother thanked her with quiet relief. Again, there were no dramatic cures, no instant transformations, just small, steady efforts, and trust. Twilight over the village. By the time she stepped outside again, the sun had nearly disappeared. The sky deepened into shades of blue and violet. Small points of candlelight flickered inside cottage windows. Smoke drifted lazily upward into cooling air. The healer paused briefly at the edge of the path, watching the sky shift toward night. This was her favourite hour, when work slowed, when voices softened, when the world felt wrapped in calm. There were no more visits scheduled for this evening. Most villagers preferred daytime consultations. Night was for rest, for quiet, for family. She began the walk back toward her cottage, her satchel lighter now, but her mind steady. Returning to the cottage when she reached her clearing, the forest beyond stood dark and still. Her cottage window glowed warmly. Inside, the fire still burned gently. She entered quietly, removing her cloak, hanging it beside the door. The cottage felt peaceful, familiar, safe. She set her satchel on the table, unwrapping the remaining jars carefully, placing them back upon their shelves, order restored, the day's duties complete. Evening reflection. She sat once more beside the hearth. The crackling fire offered soft rhythm in the quiet room. Today, she had offered comfort, small remedies, steady words, calm presence. In the medieval world, that was often enough. Outside, the village settled into sleep. Footsteps faded, doors closed, night air cooled the earth. Inside her cottage, the scent of herbs lingered gently. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the warmth, breathing out the day, and as you rest tonight, you can imagine that quiet walk between cottages, the soft glow of evening windows, the calm reassurance of steady footsteps on dirt paths, a healer moving gently through twilight, offering comfort before returning to her own warm firelight. The night is growing deeper now, and tomorrow, a new day will begin again. Night had settled fully over the village. The sky above the healer's cottage shimmered with faint stars, and the forest beyond stood quiet and dark. Inside, the fire burned low and steady. Its warm glow flickered gently against shelves of glass bottles and hanging herbs. The healer sat near the hearth, a small leather-bound book resting closed in her lap. She was not reading, she was thinking. In the medieval world, illness was rarely seen as simple. A cough was not always just a cough. A fever was not always just heat in the body. People believed sickness could come from many places: cold air, bad water, unbalanced humours within the body, or sometimes unseen forces they could not explain. The healer understood this. She had grown up hearing such beliefs. She did not mock them. She did not argue harshly against them. Instead, she listened, because belief itself had power. The four humours. Many medieval healers followed the ancient idea of the four humours: blood, phlegm, black bile, yellow bile. It was believed that health depended on balance between these elements. Too much of one, and the body would fall into discomfort. A fever might mean too much heat. Melancholy might suggest too much black bile. The healer had learned these teachings long ago. She did not follow them blindly. But she respected the patterns they described. Balance. Again and again. Everything returned to balance. Even her remedies aimed not to fight the body, but to guide it gently back toward harmony. Warm herbs for cold symptoms, cooling infusions for heat, rest for exhaustion, light broth for weakness. Nothing extreme, nothing forceful, just gentle correction. Signs and symbols. Some villagers believed illness could be caused by envy, or by a curse, or by wandering spirits unsettled in the night. When a sickness came suddenly, without clear reason, whispers sometimes followed. The healer knew these fears well. She had seen mothers clutch small charms near their children's beds. Fathers place protective symbols above doorways. She never removed such things. If a carved symbol brought comfort, why take it away? Healing was not only physical, it was emotional, spiritual, communal. Sometimes she would brew a simple tea, while quietly allowing a worried parent to whisper a prayer beside her. There was no harm in hope. The power of the moon. Certain villagers believed the moon influenced health, that its phases could stir restlessness or draw out hidden illness. The healer had observed something similar, not magic, but rhythm. Sleep often changed with the brightness of the night sky. Full moons brought lighter rest, new moons deeper stillness. So when someone complained of troubled dreams, she might glance at the sky before preparing her herbs, not because she believed the moon caused sickness, but because she respected patterns. Nature moved in cycles, and humans were not separate from it. Fear of the unknown. In medieval times, there were illnesses no one understood, sudden weakness, persistent fevers, a cough that lingered too long. Without knowledge of invisible germs, people sought visible explanations. Sometimes they blamed foul air, sometimes unclean water, sometimes bad luck. The healer did not have modern answers, but she had observation. If several villagers grew ill after drawing from the same well, she advised boiling water. If damp cottages worsened coughs, she suggested more firelight and fresh air when possible. She worked quietly with cause and effect, watching patterns, learning slowly. The village might speak of spirits, but she watched the wind, the water, the changing seasons, rituals of comfort. Occasionally, a villager would request more than herbs. They would ask for a blessing, or for the healer to sit beside the bed until sleep came. She did not refuse. Sometimes she would light a small candle, placing it gently on a wooden table. The soft flame alone could calm an anxious mind. She would speak slowly, steadily, encouraging breath to slow, encouraging fear to soften. Often, before any remedy was fully finished, the patient would already appear more at ease. Calm was powerful medicine, even if unseen, balancing belief and knowledge. The healer walked a quiet line between two worlds, the world of belief and the world of observation. She did not challenge the village openly, nor did she surrender her own careful understanding. Instead, she blended the two. If a worried mother feared a curse, the healer might hang fresh lavender above the door. Its scent would soothe, its presence would reassure, and while the mother felt protected, the calming effect of the herb would quietly help the restless child. In this way, both belief and remedy work together, not in conflict, but in gentle partnership. The night deepens. The fire in her hearth crackled softly. Outside, the wind brushed lightly against the thatch roof. The healer rose from her seat, walking slowly to the small round window. The moon hung low above the trees, silver light touching the clearing. She understood that much of her work was unseen. Her remedies were simple, her explanations humble, yet in a world filled with uncertainty, her steadiness brought peace. Perhaps that was the truest form of healing. Not dramatic cures, not powerful potions, but reassurance, consistency, balance. A quiet acceptance. As the night grew deeper, she returned to her chair beside the fire. Tomorrow would bring new concerns, new questions, new whispered fears, and she would meet them all the same way, with patience, with careful listening, with small, thoughtful remedies. In the medieval village, superstition and science were not enemies. They were threads woven together in daily life, and the healer, with her herbs and steady hands, stood gently between them, bringing calm wherever she could. And as you rest tonight, you can imagine that quiet cottage, the low glow of firelight, the distant silver moon beyond the trees, a healer sitting peacefully, understanding that healing is not only about herbs, but about comfort, balance, and steady presence in a world that does not always understand itself. The night is calm now, and the village sleeps. The morning light returned gently to the clearing, soft and pale, drifting through the small round window of the healer's cottage. Inside, everything was quiet. The fire had been rekindled. A thin ribbon of smoke curled lazily upward from the hearth. Today, there were no immediate knocks at the door, no urgent footsteps outside, just a calm beginning. The healer stood beside her wooden table, looking at the simple tools laid before her. They were not grand, not polished like a noble silverware, but each one carried purpose. Each one had earned its place. The mortar and pestle. At the centre of the table rested the stone mortar and pestle, heavy, solid, smoothed by years of use. Its surface held faint marks from countless leaves and roots crushed within. She ran her fingers lightly along its edge. Cool to the touch, steady, reliable. This was the heart of her work. With it, she transformed dried plants into powder, fresh leaves into paste, hard roots into fine dust. The sound it made, that slow, circular grinding, was as familiar to her as her own breath. Press, turn, release, press, turn, release. A rhythm that never rushed, a rhythm that grounded the room. Even villagers waiting outside sometimes found comfort in hearing it. It meant something was being prepared, something thoughtful, something meant to help. The iron kettle. Near the hearth hung a small iron kettle, darkened by years of firelight. Its handle curved slightly from long exposure to heat. Water simmered inside quietly, never boiling harshly, just warm enough to draw life from dried herbs. Steam rose gently from its spout, carrying faint scents into the air. The kettle was essential. Heat changed everything. A leaf crushed dry was one thing. A leaf steeped slowly in warmth was another entirely. Fire and water worked together. Simple elements, timeless tools, clay jars and glass bottles. Along the wooden shelves lining the cottage walls, small clay jars stood in neat rows, each sealed carefully with wax, each marked with a symbol drawn in ink, a single leaf, a small cross, a simple line. The healer could recognize each one without hesitation. She rarely needed written labels. Memory guided her hands. Beside the clay jar stood glass bottles, more fragile, more rare. Some had been traded from travelling merchants, clear glass catching firelight beautifully. Inside them rested oils infused months earlier, golden liquid, amber tones, occasionally deep green. She lifted one bottle slowly, turning it toward the light, watching the way the oil moved inside. Slow, thick, patient, like the process that created it, the wooden board and knife. On the far end of the table lay a simple wooden board, scratched lightly from years of slicing stems and roots. Beside it rested a small knife, not sharp like a soldier's blade, but precise, carefully maintained. It was used only for herbs, never for food, never for anything else. Separation mattered. Cleanliness mattered. Even without modern understanding of invisible illness, she knew that tools must remain pure in purpose. She wiped the knife slowly with linen cloth, running her thumb gently along its edge, satisfied. returning it to its place, linen cloth and pouches folded neatly in a small basket. Linen cloths waited to be used for straining infusions, wrapping roots, or tying small herb bundles. Linen was soft but strong, washable, reusable, practical. Beside them lay tiny sewn pouches, filled with dried lavender or chamomile. These were often given to restless sleepers, placed beneath pillows, hung near beds, not powerful in force, but gentle in presence. Sometimes that was enough. The leather journal. In a quieter corner of the cottage rested a worn leather-bound journal, its pages slightly yellowed, edges softened with time. The healer did not write long paragraphs, only short notes, observations, reminders. Harvest earlier next season. Root from northern grove stronger. Child rested better after smaller dose. Her handwriting was careful, measured. The journal was not only record-keeping, it was memory preserved. In a world where knowledge could fade easily, written words anchored experience, order and calm. Everything in the cottage had its place, not from strict discipline, but from respect. When tools returned to their positions, the room felt balanced, the mind felt clearer, even the air seemed lighter. She believed disorder created distraction, and distraction had no place in healing. She moved slowly from shelf to table, adjusting a jar slightly, straightening a bundle of hanging herbs, wiping a faint trace of powder from the wooden surface. The simple act of tidying was calming, grounding, like smoothing wrinkles from cloth, the sound of preparation. The day's work began again. She placed fresh leaves into the mortar. The grinding sound resumed, soft, measured. Stone meeting plant. Water simmering quietly nearby. A spoon stirring slowly within a clay bowl. The cottage filled once more with gentle noise. Nothing loud, nothing harsh, just steady activity. Outside, wind moved lightly through the trees. Inside, the healer's tools did their quiet work. Tools as companions. Over years, these objects had become companions, silent witnesses to countless days. They had seen worry, relief, hope, gratitude. They had remained steady through it all, unchanging, dependable. In many ways, the tools themselves reflected the healer's nature, simple, unadorned, purposeful, and patient. As afternoon light softened again, she placed the mortar back in its central place, hung the kettle carefully, closed the leather journal. The cottage rested once more in calm order, everything ready, everything waiting, and as you settle into rest tonight, you can imagine that quiet room, the smooth stone of the mortar beneath steady hands, the warm glow of firelight against glass bottles, the soft rustle of linen cloth being folded carefully away. Simple tools, used with care, in a life devoted to gentle healing. The day continues slowly, and there is still more to discover. The first frost arrived quietly, overnight. The green clearing outside the healer's cottage turned pale and silver. Thin crystals of ice rested gently on grass blades, catching the early morning light like scattered glass. Inside the cottage, the fire burned stronger than usual. Winter had a different rhythm, a slower one, but also a heavier one. The healer rose before dawn, as she always did. Yet the air felt sharper this morning, colder against her cheeks. She wrapped a thicker wool cloak around her shoulders before stepping toward the hearth, adding another log, watching flames stretch upward, eager and bright. Winter demanded preparation, not panic, but readiness, the quiet weight of cold. In medieval villages, winter was more than a season. It was a test. Food supplies needed to last. Firewood had to be carefully measured, and illness often came more frequently. Cold air stiffened joints. Damp cottages encouraged coughs. Long nights sometimes brought restless thoughts. The healer understood this pattern well. Each autumn, she prepared extra bundles of dried herbs, roots harvested before frost, leaves carefully stored, oil sealed tightly against cold air. Now, those preparations mattered. She moved toward the shelves, checking her jars one by one. Lavender, still plentiful. Thyme, enough for many infusions. Dried elderflower, limited but sufficient. She nodded slightly, content. The sound of winter wind outside. Wind brushed softly against the thatch roof, not violent, just steady. A low distant hum through tree branches. Snow had not yet fallen heavily, but the promise of it lingered in the air. Footsteps on frozen ground made a different sound than in summer. Sharper, more deliberate. Later in the morning, she would hear those sounds approaching her door. For now, the village still slept beneath wool blankets. She placed a kettle of water near the fire. Steam rose slowly, carrying warmth into the room. Winter remedies required more heat, more broth, more rest. Preparing for coughs and aches. She selected dried thyme from a hanging bundle. Its scent remained strong despite months of storage. Carefully crumbling it into the mortar, she began the familiar rhythm: press, turn, release. The grinding felt slightly heavier today, perhaps because of the cold, or perhaps because winter always carried quiet responsibility. She added dried elderflower next, mixing gently. The combination would ease persistent coughs, not instantly, but gradually. She poured warm water over the mixture, covering it to steep. Steam fogged the small window briefly. Outside, frost slowly melted under pale sunlight. Visitors in wool cloaks. By mid-morning, a knock sounded at her door, firm but not urgent. She opened it to find a farmer wrapped tightly in wool, his breath visible in the cold air. He removed his cap respectfully, explaining in a low voice that his joints ached more sharply this week. The healer nodded calmly, inviting him inside. She motioned for him to sit near the fire. Heat would do half the work. While he warmed himself, she prepared a small jar of infused oil, made from summer blossoms now thickened slightly in winter's chill. She instructed him to rub it gently onto stiff areas before sleep, and to keep the hearth burning steadily. Warmth was medicine too. The farmer thanked her quietly, relief already visible, simply from being heard. Shorter days, longer nights. Winter evenings arrived early. By late afternoon, the sky had already dimmed to soft grey. Snow began falling lightly, small flakes drifting downward in silence. The healer stood near her window, watching the forest turn white. Snow softened everything. Sounds grew muted, footsteps quieter, voices gentler. There was a peace in it, but also isolation. Travel between villages became difficult, supplies harder to replace. The healer knew she must rely on what she had prepared. Careful rationing, measured portions, steady planning, comfort in firelight. As darkness settled, the cottage glowed warmly against the cold night. The fire crackled louder now, its warmth filling every corner of the room. She hung extra herb bundles higher near the ceiling beams, keeping them dry, protecting them from damp air. Then she prepared a simple broth for herself, warm, light, comforting. Even healers required care. Sitting beside the hearth, she wrapped a wool blanket around her lap, listening to the gentle hiss of snow against the roof. Winter illnesses would come. More coughs, more fatigue, more requests for warm tea and steady reassurance. But she did not feel overwhelmed. Winter followed autumn. Spring would follow winter. Cycles remained constant, even in hardship. A night visit in the snow just as she prepared to rest. Another knock came softly at the door, quieter this time. She rose without hesitation, opening it to find a young boy, snow dusting his shoulders. He spoke shyly of his grandmother, whose breathing had grown strained in the cold. The healer gathered a small jar and wrapped herself in her thickest cloak, stepping out into the snowy night. The path shimmered under moonlight, each step crunching gently beneath her boots. The air felt crisp, clean, stars bright above the white earth. When she reached the grandmother's cottage, she entered calmly, placing warm cloth near the hearth, offering slow, steady instructions, encouraging warmth, rest, patience. Sometimes winter discomfort eased simply with care and heat. After some time, the older woman's breathing softened slightly. The healer left quietly, snow falling gently around her as she returned home. The deep quiet of winter sleep back inside her cottage. She removed her cloak slowly, hanging it to dry. The fire still burned faithfully. She sat once more in its glow, watching flames dance against stone. Winter was demanding, but it was also still, silent, reflective, a season of inward focus. And as you rest tonight, you can imagine that snow-covered village, the soft crunch of footsteps in frost, the warm glow of a cottage against cold darkness, a healer moving gently through winter nights, offering warmth, offering calm, one careful remedy at a time. The snow continues to fall quietly now, and the village sleeps beneath its silver blanket. Winter slowly softened into early spring. Snow melted into small streams along the village paths. The healer's cottage stood quietly as always, its thatched roof drying beneath pale sunlight. Inside, the shelves were not filled with gold coins. There were no heavy purses hidden beneath floorboards. In truth, a medieval healer rarely earned money in the way we understand it today. Payment came differently, more gently, more simply, through barter, through exchange, through quiet gratitude. A loaf of bread for a remedy. One morning, a farmer arrived at her door carrying a wrapped bundle. Inside was a fresh loaf of bread, still warm, its crust golden and slightly crisp. He placed it carefully on her table. In return, she handed him a small jar of soothing salve for cracked hands worn rough by winter. No coin changed hands. No negotiation lingered long. Both understood the balance. The bread would nourish her for days. The salve would ease his discomfort. Exchange completed. In medieval villages, trust held more value than currency. Eggs, milk, and honey. Sometimes payment arrived quietly, left at a doorstep without knocking. A small basket of eggs, a clay jug of fresh milk, a jar of honey sealed with wax. These gifts were not demanded. They were offered. The healer accepted them with humility. She never asked for more than what felt fair. If a family struggled, she often refused payment entirely, because survival was shared responsibility. A weak household affected the whole village. Generosity was practical, not just kind. Cloth and firewood. As seasons changed, so did the nature of exchange. In autumn, she might receive extra firewood, stacked neatly beside her cottage, prepared for winter's cold nights. In summer, a seamstress once brought her a length of sturdy linen cloth, enough to make fresh straining cloths for herbs. Another villager repaired part of her fence after strong winds loosened it. Payment was not always food. Sometimes it was labour, time, effort. Each contribution strengthened the quiet network of the village, living without excess. Inside her cottage, there were no extravagant decorations, no heavy tapestries, no polished silver. Her table was wooden, her stool simple, her bed stuffed with straw and wool, and yet the space felt full of purpose, full of warmth, full of quiet dignity. She required little to continue her work. Her needs were modest: bread, water, firewood, cloth, and the steady rhythm of her days. There was peace in simplicity. Fewer possessions meant fewer worries. Market day. Occasionally, the healer would walk to a nearby village market. Not often, but sometimes necessary. There she might trade dried herbs for rare ingredients she could not gather locally, perhaps a small pouch of spice from distant lands, or a thicker glass bottle brought by travelling merchants. Market day was louder than her cottage, voices overlapping, animals shifting, carts rolling across uneven ground. She moved through it calmly, unhurried, selecting only what she truly needed, then returning quickly to the quiet of her clearing, the value of reputation. Over time, her reputation became its own form of wealth. Villagers spoke kindly of her steady hands, of her patience, of the way she never rushed a visit. Trust spread slowly, like roots beneath soil. She did not advertise her skills, did not boast. Word travelled naturally, and because of that, she rarely lacked what she required to live. Reputation ensured support. Support ensured survival. Evenings of quiet contentment. At the end of many days, she would sit beside her hearth, a simple meal before her, bread torn gently by hand, a spoonful of honey, warm broth simmering quietly. Outside, the village settled into night. Chickens tucked safely into coops, doors closed against evening chill. She never counted her earnings, never measured success in weight of coin. Instead, she measured it in full shelves of herbs, in steady firelight, in the knowledge that when someone knocked, she could offer help. That was enough. A life woven into community. In the medieval world, no one lived entirely alone. Each person's well-being connected to another's. The blacksmith depended on the farmer depended on the miller depended on the baker, and somewhere among them. The healer offered balance. She did not stand above the village, she stood within it, part of its rhythm, part of its quiet exchange. Her livelihood was not built on wealth, but on trust, on reciprocity, on shared survival. Nightfall over the cottage. As twilight deepened, she rose to close her wooden shutters. The sky glowed briefly pink, then faded to deep blue. A soft breeze carried the scent of damp earth and budding trees. Spring was returning, and with it, new growth, new herbs, new cycles. She placed the last piece of bread carefully in cloth for morning, then sat once more beside the hearth, watching flames flicker gently, content, not rich in gold, but rich in connection, in simplicity, in steady purpose. And as you drift towards sleep tonight, you can imagine that quiet exchange, a warm loaf placed on a wooden table, a small jar offered in return, the gentle rhythm of a life lived simply, where value was measured not in coins, but in kindness, in trust, and in shared warmth beneath a thatched roof. The fire burns softly now, and the village rests. Spring had fully returned now. Soft green shoots push through the soil outside the healer's cottage. Birdsong once again filled the early mornings, and the village, warmed by longer days, felt alive. Inside this simple world, a healer's greatest strength was not her herbs, not her tools, not even her knowledge. It was trust. Trust built slowly, quietly, over years of steady presence. The first visit. When the healer first arrived in the village long ago, people had been cautious, curious, a little unsure. Healing was a delicate responsibility. Villagers wanted to know, was she patient? Was she kind? Did her remedies truly help? Trust was not given freely. It had to be earned, through consistency, through calm, through many small, ordinary moments. Listening before speaking. One of the reasons villagers trusted her was because she listened. When someone entered her cottage, she did not immediately reach for herbs. She asked gentle questions. She observed. She allowed pauses. Often, people felt better simply by being heard. In a busy medieval household, where labour filled most hours, few had time to sit and speak of discomfort. But in her cottage, time slowed, Words came softly, and silence was never uncomfortable. This quiet listening built confidence, helping without judgment. Illness sometimes carried shame. A farmer unable to work, a mother overwhelmed with worry, an elder feeling weaker than before. The healer never scolded, never showed frustration. She did not rush them out the door. Instead, she treated each concern with steady seriousness. Even small complaints received careful attention, because to the person suffering, no discomfort felt small. This gentle respect spread quickly through the village, and respect returned to her in equal measure. The importance of calm. There were moments when illness frightened the village, a sudden fever in multiple homes, a cough that lingered through winter. During such times, fear could spread faster than sickness. Voices would rise, rumours would travel. But the healer remained steady. She did not speak in panic. She did not exaggerate. Her tone stayed level, measured, reassuring. And that calm presence became an anchor. Even when answers were uncertain, her steadiness provided comfort. Trust passed through generations' children who once visited her cottage with scraped knees and restless sleep, grew into adults who brought their own children to her door. Trust deepened over time. It became part of the village's rhythm. Parents would say, "Go see the healer," not with doubt, but with quiet certainty. Her name was spoken gently, with familiarity. That kind of reputation could not be bought. It was grown, like herbs in a patient garden. When mistakes happened, the healer was human. Not every remedy worked quickly. Not every illness resolved easily. There were days when recovery took longer than hoped, and occasionally, despite all care, nature chose its own path. In those moments, she didn't hide. She did not avoid grieving families. She offered comfort where cures were no longer possible. She sat beside them, spoke softly, shared silence. And even then, her presence remained valued, because trust is not built on perfection. It is built on honesty and compassion. A place of quiet refuge. Over time, her cottage became more than a place for remedies. It became a refuge, a place where voices softened, where worries could be shared, where candles burned steadily in the evenings. Some villagers visited not for illness, but for reassurance, for advice, for a steady conversation during uncertain seasons, and she welcomed them, without complaint, without impatience. Her door remained open during daylight hours, a symbol of availability, of reliability, reputation beyond the village. Occasionally, a traveller from a nearby settlement would arrive. Having heard of her careful ways, word travelled slowly in medieval times, carried by merchants, by farmers at shared markets, by family ties between villages. Her reputation reached further than she ever intended. Yet she never allowed pride to take root. Each new visitor received the same quiet attention as a lifelong neighbour. The evening glow of respect one warm spring evening. As she stood outside her cottage, she watched villagers returning home from fields. A child waved to her. An elder nodded respectfully. A baker lifted his hand in greeting. Small gestures, simple acknowledgements. But together, they formed something meaningful. She was woven into the fabric of the village, not separate, not above, but part of its steady pulse. Her reputation was not loud, it was not dramatic, it did not shine like armour in sunlight, it glowed softly, like firelight through a cottage window. The quiet strength of trust. As night settled once more, she closed her shutters gently, returning to her seat beside the hearth. The fire crackled in a familiar rhythm. She reflected briefly on the day's visits, the conversations, the steady flow of care. Trust was invisible, yet powerful. It allowed her to do her work peacefully, without resistance, without fear. In a world filled with uncertainty, trust became a kind of medicine itself, and as you drift toward rest tonight, you can imagine that quiet village where a healer's reputation was built not on wealth, but on patience, on listening, on steady kindness. A small cottage glowing warmly, a door open during the day, a trusted presence in a simple medieval world. The fire burns low now, and the village sleeps in calm confidence. Years passed gently in the village. Seasons continued their steady cycle. Spring blossoms, summer warmth, autumn harvest, winter snow. And through it all, the healer remained in her small cottage at the edge of the forest. But time, as it always does, moved quietly forward. Slower mornings. Her mornings began a little later now, where once she rose before sunrise, she sometimes allowed the first light to fully enter her window. Her steps were slower, more deliberate. The mortar and pestle still rested at the centre of her table, but she lifted them with slightly more care. Not weakness, just age. Her hands, though lined with years, remained steady, gentle, experienced. She no longer visited as many homes in a single day. Villagers understood. They came to her cottage instead, bringing small baskets, fresh bread, spring flowers, not only as payment, but as appreciation, teaching the next generation one quiet summer. A young woman from the village began visiting regularly, curious, patient, eager to learn. The healer noticed the careful way she handled dried leaves, the thoughtful questions she asked. Rather than keeping her knowledge guarded, she began to teach, not through long speeches, but through demonstration. "Listen first," she would say softly. "Observe before acting." She showed her how to harvest roots without damaging the soil, how to dry herbs in gentle air, not harsh sunlight, how to grind leaves slowly, releasing scent without rushing. Lessons passed from hand to hand, from season to season, knowledge preserved, a village changed by time. The village itself had grown. Children she once treated were now parents. New cottages stood where empty land once rested. The well had been reinforced, the market slightly busier, yet her clearing remained peaceful, unchanged. Her cottage stood steady against wind and rain, its wooden door worn smooth from decades of use, its shelves filled not with riches, but with memory. Letting go of the heavy work. As years continued, she allowed the younger healer to take on more responsibility. Village visits became shared tasks. Then gradually, mostly the younger woman's role, the elder healer remained available for guidance, for quiet advice, for reassurance. Her cottage shifted from busy workshop to place of wisdom. Visitors still came, but now often for conversation as much as remedy. She listened from her familiar chair near the hearth, firelight reflecting softly in her eyes. The final winter. One winter arrived colder than most. Snow layered thickly across rooftops. Wind hummed steadily through forest branches. Inside her cottage, the fire burned warmly as always, but she moved less now, rested more. The younger healer visited daily, bringing fresh broth, tending the hearth, ensuring warmth remained constant. The village did not panic. They understood the natural rhythm of life. Just as spring follows winter, life gently returns to earth. The elder healer spent many evenings watching the flames, listening to wind, breathing slowly, peacefully. There was no fear in her small cottage, only quiet acceptance. A gentle farewell. One morning, after a calm winter night, the village awoke to stillness. The younger healer found her mentor resting peacefully in her chair. Fire embers glowing low, snow falling softly outside the window. No struggle, no disturbance, just silence. Like the closing of a well-loved book. The village mourned, but gently. They gathered outside her cottage, leaving small offerings of flowers, bread, bundles of dried herbs, not in grief alone, but in gratitude, a legacy that continued. The younger healer stepped fully into the role, using the same mortar, the same kettle, the same wooden table. The shelves remained filled, the door remained open, the village remained cared for. And though the elder healer was gone, her presence lingered in every careful movement, every measured infusion, every quiet conversation. Her legacy was not carved in stone, not written in grand books. It lived in practice, in trust, in steady kindness passed forward. The cottage in spring. When spring returned once more, green shoots appeared again in the clearing. Birdsong filled the air. The cottage stood as it always had, warm, simple, steady. And inside, a new healer ground leaves in the old stone mortar. Press, turn, release. Press, turn, release. The same rhythm, unbroken, life continuing, knowledge continuing, calm continuing. And as you drift gently towards sleep tonight, you can imagine that small medieval village, the soft glow of a cottage at forest's edge, a healer who lived simply, worked patiently, and left behind something more lasting than gold. A legacy of care, of balance, of quiet presence. The fire burns low now, the snow has melted, and the village rests peacefully beneath the stars,